I always knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur, but I'm old, right? So back in the day, there was no entrepreneurship. I grew up in a family-owned business. My grandparents came from Italy. They had an Italian restaurant for 50 years. So I kind of grew up in the restaurant business. I didn't want to be in the restaurant business. I didn't take the restaurant over. I said, that's not for me. But I always wanted to do something. I just didn't know what that was. There was no entrepreneurship in college like there is today. So I chose between accounting and economics, and went with economics. Not sure there was a right choice there. Instead, because I liked Wall Street. So I started my career off in financial services. So I worked at Nations Bank, which is now Bank of America. I worked at T. Rowe Price. I worked at Putnam in the mutual fund world. I decided to do the entrepreneurial thing. I was living in Charlotte, North Carolina. It was 1997-ish, somewhere around then. And a kid that I was working with was dating a girl whose dad worked for Dale Jarrett. I'm not sure if there's any NASCAR fans, but Dale Jarrett's a driver from back in the day. And neither of us, he was from Cleveland, Ohio. I'm from Syracuse, New York. There's no NASCAR, right? So he went to a race, and he's like, wow, these are just moving billboards. And we were both studying for our CFA, which is a designation for if you want to be like a portfolio manager. And we really didn't want to. It's ridiculous. It's like the bar exam. It's just books and books and books. So he said to me, hey, what if we start a mutual fund? I was like, that's kind of a cool idea, but we worked in the product side, not in the investment side. And so we said, well, how could we have a gimmick? So we created a company called Stock Our Stocks Mutual Fund, which was in Charlotte, North Carolina, which if you've been to the South, it's NASCAR Central. And the idea was, the slogan was invest in companies that invest in your sport. So we tried to create an affinity fund, and we knew how to do product and we knew how to do marketing. So we did it. We had no idea what we were doing. I also knew nothing about technology. So this was right when the web was starting. And so we divide and conquer. So my gig there was to build the website out. We were direct to consumer.
Wow.
Buying as a mutual fund. And so I learned technology there. It's kind of a joke what I learned now. What I learned back then was brochureware. And I got the entrepreneurial bug. We sold the company within 18 months.
Wow.
And so then I left and went off. I went to Boston and just kept starting companies.
Wow.
And the lull in there was when you saw the 2004 was I started a second company that failed. And when it failed, I was calling all of I was a financial services play. I was calling all of my customers to say, hey, we're out of business. T. Rowe Price was one of my customers. And they, on the spot, offered me a job. So I went to T. Rowe. So that's why you see a break, and you probably went back to, it was 2000, 2004.
Right.
Which was, I needed a job again. I had blown through the money that I had made trying to do the second startup. And went back and just sort of started over again.
Nice.
And that was more of a replenish the bank account job than anything. And then I always knew I'd go do another one. It was just a matter of time to get.
So that urge was always there, right?
It's still there.
It's still there. Right? I was going to say, we'll come to that in a sec. And so, in the last startup that you had, you went through the acquisition process. What was that like?
So I'll tell you, I've sold three companies, and each one is vastly different. So the first one, the Stock Our Stocks, we were acquired just to go away. So Conseco, which is not around anymore, Conseco Capital Management, had invested $40 million into NASCAR to be the official financial services company of NASCAR. And yet you had 320-somethings that had no business being on Squawk Box and every place else we were, sort of eating into their mind share. So they literally bought us to just shut it down. So that was an interesting one. You got some money, and it was like, just go away, and your baby got killed.
Right. How'd that feel?
I didn't really care.
Yeah, because you're like, okay,
I wasn't invested in it.
Yeah.
And by the time I got killed, I had already moved on.
It's a little validation there that you did something.
When I sold the second one, that one probably was the toughest for me. So I had a company called Cuse. It was, so I don't know if you guys remember a company out here called PowerSet. PowerSet. They were a search company backed by Peter Thiel. They were taking technology out of Xerox PARC and trying to commercialize it, monetize it. and it was really around natural language process for search. I happened to own with my partner at the time, my co-founder, the first patent ever granted on natural language processing, semantic search, the ability to basically extract emotion and meaning from content to tell a story. And so the patent portfolio was ridiculously valuable. The problem is my co-founder was like nutty professor guy. And so we had built, literally, I think I was on version 113 of our prototype, and it wasn't commercially viable. And I knew Fireside had, we were both doing sort of the same thing, but in different ways. I didn't have $12 million from Peter Thiel, nor Peter Thiel's connections. We had raised a bunch of money, but East Coast money is very different than West Coast money.
Definitely.
And so, and we were in DC of all places, so it wasn't even like I was in New York or Boston doing this. So we sold that. We ended up selling it to Nathan Myhrvold. Has a company called Intellectual Ventures up in Seattle. Nathan Myhrvold's the original chief architect from Microsoft. So if you've ever seen that famous picture of the 8 of them, he's one of them. It was ironic that Fireside was sold to Microsoft.
What's your partner's name?
Barney Pell was Fireside. Mine was a guy named Lawrence Au.
Gotcha.
So Barney was our arch nemesis.
Gotcha.
Barney.
We talked about putting the two companies together, and so I got to know Barney a little bit. But Barney made a little bit more money than I did. They sold for $100 million to Microsoft and became, well, I'll say this loosely, became Bing. It really didn't. Microsoft was trying to buy a couple companies at the time.
Right.
Yahoo being one of them, didn't work. This was their sort of save face moment. I sold for 8 figures, not 9 figures. So it wasn't a bad payday, but not the same. That one hurt because there was a real there. And we didn't, the part of the problem was the computing power. Like what exists today didn't exist back then. We still needed rooms of servers to process what we were doing. We were writing in a code called Lisp. I'm not sure if anyone knows Lisp.
Sorry.
You think it's hard to find developers? Go try and find a Lisp developer. Right. So we were, and what we were doing was not optimal. And so I had actually acquired another company in this process. A guy that had worked with Lawrence before, who was sort of the hired gun. If you wanted to port from Microsoft to Apple, he was the guy you went to. Unbelievably talented, and he was building a semantic search company on the side for shits and giggles. And so his name was Danny Espinoza. The best part of my company, Q's, was that I found Danny. Danny and I went on to we found 3 companies after that together. But I knew there was something there. And it was one of those things like, oh, we're so close, but if it was today with sort of Moore's law playing out and computing power, what it is, we would have been in a much different situation. So that was hard. Yeah. But we sold it and we didn't have to go with it, which was great.
That's great.
Got the money and we went off to start the next one. CardStar, which is my last company that I sold. So you hear about this all the time. Half of acquisitions don't work, right? You get acquired and then you hear the founders leave and nothing happened. We were that half that didn't work. Got acquired by Constant Contact. It was a bidding war. I actually thought PayPal was going to buy us. If I had, in the moment, if you had said, who are you going to bet on? I would have bet on PayPal. Turns out we ended up going to Constant Contact. They kind of sold us a bill of goods, right? We're building this system, and we got there, and we're like, okay, great, where's the API? And we don't have one. Well, what do you mean? You bought us to sit on top of something that you don't have? And they had something that was like fake it till you make it, right? Yeah. It wasn't really there. Yeah. And so I tried to buy the company back because I was so angry. Yeah. And when I sold it, we were the largest mobile loyalty platform in the world. And I was pissed because it was one of those moments like, wow, I could have kept going, right? And it didn't work. But the silver lining there is that got me to where I am today.
It's true.
So.
And so I want to get into that too, because then you start to take these roles, really leading incubators and innovation. But if I know you have a son or you have a daughter as well.
2 sons.
2 sons. Yeah. If one of them was to start their own company, and you were in there like, Dad, what are a few pieces of advice you'd give me as a?
So I have a son that has started. He's 12. He has a business.
All right, excellent. And what's some of the advice you give him as a fellow entrepreneur?
So So he's been mowing lawns and doing snow removal for years. He's been driving commercial grade lawnmowers for years. My in-laws have a farm in Connecticut, so he's been doing this since literally he'd sit on his grandfather's lap and do it. And so I tell him early, like Brady, he'd go. His name's Brady. He'd go mow someone's lawn. I was like, well, did you go up and tell them, like, here's how much it costs and here's what I want? No. Well, do you want to get paid? Yeah. Well, why wouldn't you tell them, here's my rate, here's what, well, because they'll pay me more because they think I'm cute. Honest to God. And I was like, well, maybe, but you gotta. So I started talking early on, like, it's about expectation setting, right? And so we moved in. We built a house and we moved into this new house, and the neighbors across the street. I'm over there with Brady painting one day. We hadn't moved in yet, and the doorbell rings. So I'm like, who's ringing? I don't know anybody, right? And so we go to the door, and it's this older couple that lives across the street from us. And they said, hey, this is going to sound funny, but do you mind if I come in and look around at your new house? We've been watching it go up for like the last 6 months, and we're just curious. And we're like, sure, come on in. And so Brady goes over. I'm taking them on a tour of our house, and Brady goes over and he starts writing a contract. Wow. This was 4 years ago, so he had to be 8. And he, it's funny because all the misspellings and the funny, but there was like a sign here. And so I said to him, that I'm really impressed, buddy. Why? Well, you told me I have to manage expectations and I need to get people to sign up for my rate, so I want a contract. He walked up to Henry, who's our neighbor now, and said, hey, do you want your lawn done? Sign here with a contract. And I laughed, and it was on the back of an envelope, like, some junk mail we had gotten. And it was great. So, but I talked to him a lot about managing expectations. I talked to him a lot about the customer matters most, right? Like, and you guys all know this, but and I talked to him about math. That's the thing I talked to him about, because he's not great at math. But I keep telling him, he needs to understand, for example, if he was going to do a patio for somebody, right? Well, you got to calculate how many cubic yards of this do you need and that do you need, whatever. And I do that partly because I want him to get better at math, but also because he needs to understand, like, in scoping, it's our exercise today that we went through, right? Before you go in and talk to someone, you have to understand what they want. And then you have to understand, okay, well, what will it take to get there? How do I back into my price? So it's like the ABCs of things, right? And I think people so often start companies for the wrong reasons. And so they go on this path of saying what people want to hear. Focus is unbelievably important, right? As you guys all know. But it's easy to meander. It's easy to say, well, there's some short-term revenue in front of me. Or this opportunity that's like we were one of them, right? You could have easily said no to us. Thankfully, you didn't. But it's easy to do those things. So I talk a lot about focus. It's fundamentals. Focus, understanding what the customer expectation is, managing that expectation, and then I tell them all the time, if you're going to be a ditch digger, be the best damn ditch digger you can be. Doesn't matter what you do, just be really good at it. Have pride in your work. And so those things I think are really the same for all of us, right? And you often overlook the basics because you're running so fast and you're trying to do whatever it is you're trying to do to get a piece of business or build a new thing or whatever. And if you miss the basics, you can often find yourself later going, ooh, whoops.
Definitely. No, I think that's great advice. Things that I think about all the time. So speaking about kind of teaching and creating pathways for startups and so forth, you then went into a role at Constant Contact, essentially creating an incubator and leading innovation there. And then now, and I'd love to hear more also about that and how that led then to the AARP hatchery.
So after I asked the CEO if I could buy the company back and she said no, I had a 2-year lockup. So what happens when you get acquired, oftentimes the founders get locked up for some period of time. And so I had significant dollars on the table still. And so she's like, well, obviously you probably want to get your money. I don't want to have you leave because it looks bad for us. What do you want to do? Okay. My partner, Danny, had moved out here to start our mobile division in our San Francisco office. And so I didn't really want to do that anymore. That was reporting to me. So I said, well, why don't we start an innovation program? We didn't have any innovation really, right? And the organization was deathly afraid of killing itself. So I said, well, my goal is going to be to kill Constant Contact. And oh, by the way, we were already getting killed by HubSpot and MailChimp. We just didn't want to recognize that. And so when I started the program, we started simply by trying to figure out how do we get the small wins. It's no different than you guys, right? You have investors, you have customers. How do you get those small wins? How do you build the momentum? I talk about it with these guys all the time. And so I built an internal function that was like an internal IDEO, and we helped the rest of the company, and that went well. So I went from 3 employees to 6 employees. And I said, hey, we should build our own startups. So then I went and I added another 7 people. It was a small little startup team. And we started building things ourselves. And then I said, the throughput's just not there, right? It's the venture math. I got to have 10 investments to get 1 hit. So how do we enhance our odds? Well, we work with startups. So we created a program called InnoLoft. And InnoLoft was also a space. We built a 30,000 square foot, which was sizable space in Boston to house our team and to house these startups. One of the things I didn't like, or I still don't like, about many of the accelerator programs is that all of them have primary or some sort of ulterior motive. Like at the end of the day, Techstars and YC are venture funds, right? They just have a unique way of sourcing deal flow, and they've done really well. So then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? And so if you're looking for capital and you're looking for that stamp, they're awesome. There's other programs like Mass Challenge or Dream It where they don't take any equity, and it's about, we're going to just help you. And I don't like those programs at all. Partly because they'll have younger first-time entrepreneurs come in, and you'll get 10 guys like us that'll come in and do mentoring, but yet we're not willing to roll up our sleeves and kind of put our money where our mouth is. So I looked at the landscape and said, wow, there's an opportunity to create an accelerator program to help startups, but at the same time help Constant Contact. So everybody knows the Google 10% time, right? You get to spend time going, and I don't do it anymore, but right. That works at Google because anyone there that has an idea can actually go build it.
Right.
Most companies, it doesn't work. And Constant Contact was a tech company. We had about 400 engineers and product folks, but out of like 1,500 people. So we would try things like hackathons, and you'd end up having the product people show up and nobody else. So we said, well, how do we engage everybody else? So one of the ideas was do an accelerator, bring startups in, don't take equity. And if you were a startup focused on creating value for small business or nonprofits, you were eligible. And what we did is we went to the entire company and said, hey, everyone gets 10% time. Your 10% time is joining a temporary extended team to work for a startup. 4 hours a week, you got to come downstairs to the Loft. We were on the first floor, they were on the second and third. And for those 4 hours, you actually worked for a startup. And it was unbelievably successful because we were talking about it today. Resources, right? Well, resources with really deep domain expertise, even harder. So we were able to create these temporary extended teams. The only sort of no-no for us was dev, right? Because now we have work product issues. So we just kind of said, well, if you don't do it while you're working, we won't really know. So we did have some engineers that did some coding for some of the startups, but like UX, UI was huge. Marketing, conversion marketing, the funnel was huge. And so we created these teams, and it worked so well that I actually bought it. I bought InnoLoft from Constant Contact a little over 2 years ago. With the intent of taking that model and just bringing it into other companies. Because the benefit we saw inside of Constant Contact was tremendous, from retention, measurable gains in retention, to creating journeys. Do you guys do journey mapping at all? So we did journey maps when we built the space around HR. So the idea was when someone came in for an interview, HR picked them up in our space, and there was a specific, I'll call it tour, where they got the person would get picked up and they would go through our space, and there was a narrative that the HR person would do, and then they'd go upstairs to like Boringville, and then they'd come back down and they'd finish it in our space. And we saw where we were sort of, I joke around this, a good friend of mine here, this guy Zephyrin Lasker, he lives in San Francisco. We were his safety school. He went and he interviewed at 3 or 4 places. he knew he'd get an offer from us.
Yeah.
So he was going to just leverage that as his horse in the horse race, create a horse race for this. And after he came to meet with me and went through our journey, he said, "You're no longer my safety school. You're where I want to work."
Wow.
And that became pretty prevalent. And so I saw how this worked, and the startups got unbelievable value
Right. Yep.
from it. So the idea was to take it private. I'm good friends with Blue Run Ventures out here, and so I was going to actually put a Blue Run fund behind it, and sort of create this alternative to YC or Techstars or whatever. And it checked all of my sort of boxes. The entrepreneurial
Yeah,
thing,
it's still
right?
entrepreneurial, even though
It's entrepreneurial in itself,
within that. Yeah.
But then I also get to work with startups.
Yep.
And not just mentor, but actually roll my sleeves up and work with them. I still get to work with large companies and watch, because at the end of the day, convince, especially in B2B, the only way that you guys get from, 15 people, 14, whatever you are, to 30 to 100 people to whatever is you got to leverage some large companies to get you to scale faster. Yep. So I figured I could do that. I could convene all these things. And so I bought it and never did anything with it. Actually shut it down at the end of last year because of AARP.
Yeah. So how did that happen? Like, how did you? I mean, when people think of AARP, right, and AARP, they don't necessarily think of innovation or. We had talked to AARP for a good year and a half, 2 years, and it was a different experience.
I'm with you.
Now, but yeah. So how did that go down?
Yeah, the phone rang one day, and I picked it up, and I got a call asking if I would be interested in talking to AARP, and I laughed and I said, "Old people."
You're like, wait, am I that?
So the funny thing is, and I have this on my Facebook still. I 48 yesterday was my birthday.
Congratulations.
But, I'm not sure that's a congratulations. I don't feel 48, but when I was 43, I got an AARP card in the mail, and I took a picture of it and I put it on my Facebook, and I don't know what the fuck.
Yeah.
Right, and hashtag AARP, whatever, something AARP, and so it was kind of a joke. Like my friends were like, "You're old," or whatever. So AARP called, and I chuckled. I was like, I just bought this thing. I had big plans. And I have a mentor. She's a VC in Boston. She invested in a couple of my companies who I really look up to. So I went to her and I said, "Hey, Maya, got this phone call. I don't know what to do with it." And her response to me was, "Don't underestimate AARP." I knew nothing about it. To me, AARP was like insurance and old people and lobbying, right? So, and I didn't grow up in a household where my grandparents, or that I recall, like seeing magazines and my grandparents were part of it. And I just don't remember that. So she said, "I think you should take the call." So I took a call. I did a call with them, and she's like, at a bare minimum, maybe they can be because they're messed up. Maybe they can be a partner in a loft in what you're doing. Did a call, was intrigued enough. Went back to Maya, talked to her. She goes, "Well, let me ask you another question. If you had to rank the top 10 most influential corporate innovation executives in the United States, do you think this job is in that top 10? Interesting way to frame it. Didn't ever think about that. And her logic was 38 million members, representing over 100 million people, huge lobbying arm, unbelievable clout, and convening power. So I said, okay, let me test it. And I went down to DC, and the funniest thing is the guy who hired me, he did the same shit that I did with people at the loft. He brought me to the hatchery, very first thing, and I had told him this already. In my call, I had told him all about, because he had done some homework on it. So I had told him how we created this whole journey, how everyone got picked up with the loft. So he brings me to the hatchery, and if those of you who've been to the hatchery, it's not what you expect, right? Like you open the elevator's open, and you're like, damn. The quote from one of the guys who wrote about it was, "It's more Google than Google." and so I got off the elevator and I was like, "Fuck, really?" and I'm not. I didn't even think about it in the moment. Afterwards, I was like, "Son of a bitch, you did exactly what I was doing to everyone to me."
That's great.
But they put their money where their mouth is. Now I'll say it was cart before the horse. They built a beautiful facility without really knowing what to do with it. But I just kept getting to know them, and I kept spending time.
They're waiting
there.
for you to come.
And I did test my theory a bit with Terry, Terry was my boss at the time. around the convening power, right? And it turns out we can get anyone in the room we want, right? At the most senior level. So you want to talk to Facebook, you want to talk to Amazon, you want to talk to Google, you want to whomever. It's a phone call or two away, and we have that ability, which is interesting. So that coupled with the fact that what Terry and Joanne were really looking for was exactly what I did at Constant Contact, and they already had a few pieces in place. So the idea was, okay, can I take this blueprint that I was doing on a small scale and do it on a much larger scale? And so that was my challenge, right? It wasn't. I knew that the pieces were going to be the same. The environment's vastly different.
Yeah.
And so that was the part one. Part two was, as an entrepreneur, and I don't know if you've ever said this, you get asked, why are you doing what you do, right? And people will be like, oh, to change the world. And they're like, yeah, really. There's like 10 entrepreneurs that have ever changed the world, right? And we can all build great product, and we can have nice little businesses, and we can make people money and whatever. But I never really built anything that I felt could truly change the world. I built a mobile loyalty app. Maybe the search thing could have, but Google kind of beat us to it, right? So I looked at this and said, wow, it's an opportunity for us to go build product and work with startups that can truly have material societal impact because of the convening power, the clout, and the scale. And so that was the second piece. So I answered the first question that Maya had asked me, do I think this is one of the top 10 most influential jobs? I said, I checked the yes box. It's clearly not number one, probably closer to 10, but nonetheless, the ability to get anyone in a room was really interesting. And then secondly, that I can say with a straight face that I think now that we can truly build product or service that can have material societal impact. Whereas I didn't really do that before, even though I said that before.
That's great.
It wasn't really the case. So those were the reasons I decided to take the job. Turns out that, and I didn't know this at the time, Joanne Jenkins, our CEO, who I now work for, wants her legacy to be innovation. So there's lots of money. That's why the hatchery existed before I existed. There's lots of appetite for risk that they never had before. Hence, we're doing deals with startups. So you mentioned all the conversations you've had in the past with AARP. That didn't exist because there was no group like mine. There was no team that knew how to work with startups. There was no governance on how you work with startups. It was all we knew was a passive licensing model, right? United Healthcare. You put our name on top of the MedSup insurance, and that was sort of what they did. And so if Enwoven came along or the History Project came along, they didn't know what to do with you. It was a one-size-fits-all. But what they also didn't understand is the worst thing that AARP could say to a startup is maybe. And we were saying maybe all the time. You got to say yes or no. You're doing a disservice to the entrepreneur because you're giving them so you're saying there's a chance, right? and so people will grab onto that, and especially the more desperate they get, the more they may cling to this hope that AARP is going to do something with them. And the reality is our model the economics don't work because we don't change the model whether you're a startup like Enwoven or you're United Healthcare. It's the same model. So fundamentally flawed in that it's impossible. But yet they just kept saying maybe to you.
I experienced that. Wanted to switch gears slightly. We work with a lot of executives in the innovation space at their particular organizations. And one of the things that they talk to us a lot about and have used Woven for is scaling innovation, right, across. Like how are they capturing the knowledge around it so that others can benefit from that? What are some things that you've seen work well for larger companies, especially with the Interloft experience and now with AARP, that help scale those innovations and so that they don't just wither out and die, even if they were great ideas to begin with?
Yeah, I don't see a lot of good things out there.
Yeah,
I'll tell you that much. You have some systems that are more geared towards capturing ideas and sort of storing ideas and doing open innovation challenges than you have around a knowledge base. And partly, I think that's the shiny new thing was, let's do an open innovation challenge and or a hackathon where we do a challenge and we just capture the 503 ideas or projects people had, and then it kind of stops. And part of the reason it stops is because the hackathon, model there is the teams actually don't get to go work on it after the hackathon. So they collect all this stuff in this big, nice system, and then hopefully someone's supposed to go look at it behind the scenes and go, oh, we should do that one. Doesn't ever happen. So those are the systems I see by and large. Mm-hmm. We have one today. I don't even know if, I know Foundation uses it. It's called Bright Ideas. Mm-hmm. I mean, we spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on this thing. Our team doesn't use it. I mean, it's used, I guess, to capture ideas someplace else. The real missing link here is corporate innovation, by and large, is very it's very immature still, and there's very few companies that do it right. You have to know why you're doing it. Some companies do it as purely a PR exercise. So I want the shiny new thing. The CEO wants to go talk about innovation, and we're doing hackathons and we're training people on human-centered design. And if you want to have, if Unwoven wants to be on the list of best places to work in Oakland, you have to do that, right? We haven't announced this yet, but we just participated in the Washington Post, and turns out we're one of the best places to work. Turns out in the word cloud, the largest word is innovation, right? Turns out before I got here, we hired a consulting firm to teach everyone human-centered design, right? It's great, but what is your expectation? Expectation from our CEO is we're going to drive my goal for the team, revenue, which is also very different because it's nonprofit. Teaching everyone human-centered design, awesome, but that doesn't drive revenue. So why are you doing it is the most important thing. And then when you work from there, you can work backwards into what tools should you have in place, or what mechanisms or frameworks should you have in place to capture the knowledge. We were talking earlier, the get hit by the bus thing. Well, as you guys say, beer truck. And we were joking, and I said to Brittany, like, it's a real thing, in that if these two or these three this is confetti, right? 3 people. If any one of them get hit by a bus tomorrow, we're sort of in trouble. Like, okay, well, all the institutional knowledge that they have, or a third of it, or hopefully only one of you get hit by a bus, is gone.
You can't walk down the street at the same time.
Yes. We're going to make that. You can't take the same airplane home.
Yeah, exactly. We're splitting you.
No, but the reality is, I think that's really important to be able to capture that. And there aren't. I mean, it's when I saw Unwoven for the first time, and what your core business is, I thought it was awesome. I mean, our teams use it now internally to try and capture knowledge around the different projects. There's a secondary use tier tool, which I find really interesting. And that is, I mentioned small wins. I mentioned sort of getting momentum with the C-suite and keeping it. We gave access to people, and not confetti, but our Unwovens. So Brittany helped every one of our projects create an Unwoven. And we said, okay, here's each Unwoven. Now we can create transparency when people are like, what are they doing over there in that hatchery place? They're spending all this money. They're not doing it. That's not necessarily true. And so now we can actually let people have a glimpse into what we're working on, right? And maybe they even contribute to what we're working on. And so you can sort of open the aperture to just general exposure, but also to potential participation in what we're doing. And solve the get hit by the bus issue. So I think that really that what you guys are doing is really, hence you've seen the growth you've seen in the innovation space and the large Fortune 500 companies that you're working with, because there really isn't anything out there that's
great,
letting you capture it.
Well, no, I appreciate that, and like to hear how it's being used too. I guess the last question before we wrap up is, you've told us a lot of great stories. So storytelling seems to be one of your skills. How have you applied storytelling to your roles around innovation and entrepreneurship, and how has it impacted that?
So storytelling is something that is essential to everything you guys do. You have to be able, from a sales perspective, right? You have to be able to storytell. I think when I hire people, one of the things I look for is can they not everyone's at the same place, right, when you hire them, but have they mastered sort of the art of storytelling, or do they have all what it takes to become storytellers? It was funny when we did the confetti launch. Did they see that launch by chance?
Yeah, we had
Did you
that
watch
live
the video?
stream. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so they rocked it, right? These two did an awesome job of storytelling, and I think that's really important because you can draw people in. One of the best pieces of advice I was given early on when I was trying to raise money was a VC said no to me. And often VCs will say no, and well, they don't even say no. They just don't call you back,
Yeah,
right? That's the VC no.
Yeah.
They often do that intentionally because they don't want to give you feedback. Because if they give you feedback, you can say, well, what if I change? Like, it gives you this opportunity to keep asking, what if I change it? But I had, and then he's now one of my closest VC friends at Blue Run, this guy Jonathan Ebinger. Jonathan said to me, we're not going to invest, but don't stop trying. He said, your passion is infectious. And so one of the things I talk about a lot is it's hard to be a good storyteller if you're not passionate about what you're talking about. Right? So just have as much passion as you can. And if you're not passionate about it, you probably should find something else to do.